Well, welcome to the Certified Livestock Management webinar series presented by the Ohio State University Extension Water Quality Team. This is the first webinar in a series that'll take place in 2026. I am Heather Torlina. I'm a water quality associate for Williams, Fulton, and Lucas counties here in Ohio. Today's webinar topic will be on integrated pest management for livestock operations. Once again, this webinar is presented to you by the OSU Water Quality Team. Here is the team in this picture and the counties they represent. Feel free to reach out to any one of us with questions or comments. We are happy to help. Or you can check out our website, waterqualityextension.osu.edu, for more information about our team as well. So, as for today's webinar, let me introduce the speaker, Kenley Zuga. In her role as a regional sales manager with Central Life Sciences, Kenley works with livestock producers across the Midwest to help educate them on integrated pest management programs and feed through fly controlled options. Kenley earned her BS in Animal Sciences from the University of Findlay and her MBA from Youngstown State University. She has spent the past 8 years involved in the cattle industry and has held prior positions working in cattle genetics and reproduction and dairy heifer rearing. She is passionate about educating producers on the negative impact flies have on cattle and working together to find the right solution to fit their needs. So this presentation will explain the severe impacts that insects can have on your operation and share a variety of strategies to combat them. We will also cover insect identification in detail so producers can better understand the enemy. Producers will gain a basic understanding of how to design and implement an IPM program on their operation to help reduce insect population and increase production values. So as always, if you have any questions for our speaker throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the webinar. Also, there will be CCA credits and CLM credits available. And so if you are in need of those, stay tuned till the end of the webinar and we'll make sure you get that information. So without further ado, Kenley, are you ready to share your screen?
Yep, all ready.
All righty. The floor is yours.
All right, looks good, Heather.
Yep, looks good.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Heather, and your team for inviting me to speak today. And thank you, everybody in attendance and everybody that will watch this for tuning in today. So thank you for the introduction. My name is Kenley. I live over in Northeast Ohio and work for Central Life Sciences. And as she mentioned, today we're going to kind of run through a bunch of different pests and kind of call out the main ones that producers deal with on livestock operations and come up with a couple of strategies to help control them. So just a kind of run through of what we're going to cover. Why does insect control matter? Do a little bit of insect ID, introduce kind of the concept of integrated pest management, IPM, go through a couple categories of control, a couple strategies, concepts, ideas on how producers can put together an IPM program of their own. And if we have time, we'll get to a couple real world examples here in the end. So I think Heather's intro kind of covered it all, but I went to the University of Findlay. I'm originally from Eastern Pennsylvania. Went to the University of Findlay for animal science. So I worked at the farm there as a student supervisor. So got to learn a lot about all the different species we had there. We had sheep, goats, pigs, beef cattle. The only thing we didn't have was dairy cattle, and ironically, that's a lot of what I do now is the dairy industry. But did a lot of internships, learned a lot about a lot of different parts of the industry. Right out of school, I was a breeder for ABS, so I bred up in Vermont for a summer, and then I bred down here in Worcester, Ohio area for them. My husband and I have a small family cow-calf operation in Trumbull County. And yeah, I love the industry. I'm very passionate about it. And my role allows me to work a lot with producers, do a lot of education, and also just helping them come up with solutions for problems that they're facing. Now, if you ever told me that the problem would be insects, I probably wouldn't have believed you back in college, but this is kind of what my camera roll looks like now on a day-to-day basis. So I do a lot of farm work, helping producers put together IPMs. We do a lot of troubleshooting. They'll call us if they have, an insect control issue going on, and we'll come out there and try to help put together a protocol for them and see what products we have within our company's portfolio, but also just the industry in general. And Heather asked me to include this video here. So this is a swine operation, and we'll get some time at the end to touch on this, but this is a serious cockroach issue that this specific swine facility was facing. So we do it all. We do anything from flies. We have a team that does specifically works with a lot of the swine integrators. They're our swine team. And then we have a lot of us stationed all over the country to help producers with anything insect related. So many of you probably haven't heard of Central Life Sciences, but I'm pretty sure you probably have heard of one of our brands. So you can see here, Central Life Sciences is owned by a company out of California called Central Garden and Pet. But within Central Life Sciences, we pretty much focus mainly on insect control in the ag industry. So we have our feed additive group, which would be the side that I work with. So we do Alticid IGR and a lot of pasture mineral products. We're the manufacturers of that, as well as Clarifly. Starbar would be our packaged products lines. And then you can see here, we are affiliated and owned by Central Garden and Pet, who also owns all of these other brands. So Farnham in the horse world, Pennington Grass Seed, Nylabone, Amdro, Antbait, Pet Control or Pet Flea and Tick Control, Adams. So very, very large organization. We have manufacturing facilities in Dallas and in Council Bluffs, Iowa. So all of our products are U.S. made. And a lot of what Central Life Sciences specifically focuses on is pest control. So I'd like to think we've gotten really good at it. And then you can see here some of our other products branch out a little more, but as a whole, we do a lot of pest control, and we've invented a lot of the different molecules and technologies that we use today as an industry, methoprene, diflubenzuron, things like that. So before we get into the insect ID, I want to first take a step back, and as producers, why worry about fly control or insect control? And I think it's important to kind of even take a step back and think about, why do we raise livestock? And some of us might raise it, as a hobby or for fun, for enjoyment, but a majority of us are raising them because it's business, right? It's income, and these animals have this really cool ability to take a forage and convert it into a profitable commodity. So they can take something that humans we really probably couldn't otherwise utilize very efficiently, and they can turn it into meat or milk or wool and turn it into a profitable commodity. Now, coming from a kind of genetics background, I know how much time and effort and money goes into genetics, whether it's in the show world, if it's in the production world. We spend a lot of time picking out genetics, and we spend a lot of money on it. And I think the one thing that people forget is the genetic equation, phenotype, genotype, you also have environment in there. So we can go through all these lengths and pick out the best genetics, the best bulls to use on these cows. But if we don't give them a good environment, they don't ever have that ability to reach that full genetic potential that we picked out for them. And then obviously flies create a lot of stress and discomfort. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I kind of break it down into 4 different categories here. One of the biggest impacts, and I think it's a very hot topic right now, is disease. So especially with HPAI, how it's hit a lot of dairies, it's hit a lot of obviously poultry facilities. Insects can transmit disease, and there's a lot of studies out there. I took a slide out just for the sake of time, but I mean, there's hundreds of viruses and bacteria and fungus that can be spread by insects. So it's a biosecurity concern. and as well as a sanitation concern. But you can see here a couple of the different diseases that insects have been proven to transmit. And you can do, you can Google and do some research and come up with all the research that shows this. But BVD, scours, pink eye is one that on the cattle side we talk a lot about when we talk about flies, mastitis, pneumonia. We do have some insects that are blood feeders, so you do have to worry about anaplasmosis, PRRS in the swine world, and PEDV. So very, very important factor of insect control is the biosecurity piece. But then we also have the financial side of it. We have a lot of research we've done internally. There's a lot of external research that shows the impact that some of these insects can have on production values. We're talking, weaning weight differences of 20, 30 pounds on the hornfly side. We're seeing decreased feed intake, bunk refusals. If these cows are stressed, these animals are stressed, they don't want to go to the feed bunk. If the feed bunk is crawling with flies, they don't want to stick their face in there. On the show side, we'll see hide issues with show animals, and even at slaughter, if you have a lot of, specifically on the swine side, but if you have a lot of bites or welts or bruising from some of these different insects, you could even get docked at slaughter and at market. Some of these insects too can impact your actual facilities. So you saw that video with the cockroaches. They were actually living in the plastic panels of the farrowing crates. So that ultimately, will destroy those panels and the swine barns. Cockroaches also will get into electrical boxes, wires. They like the heat, so they can totally wreck an operation mechanically and electrically as well. Stress, I think that's one that's a little more commonly known. Take the hornfly, for example. A single hornfly will feed up to 40 times per day off of an animal. So you multiply that by hundreds of hornflies, and you can see how that can be really stressful for the animal. We talked about irritation at the feed bunk, blood loss. We have a calculator. Years ago, somebody did some research and figured out how much blood that hornfly was taking every bite and multiplied that out across the season, across a herd of 100 head of cattle. And I think it was like 1,200 gallons of blood, something like that, that the horn flies were taking. So I just think about the nutrition loss from that and how much nutrition now we have to put into them just to make up for the blood loss there, let alone the fly avoidance behaviors. Were they bunching? Were they, throwing feed? Were they stomping, tail swishing? That's all energy that we want them to be putting into putting on meat or muscle or making milk. And then this one on the right here, the employee satisfaction side has really, really taken off as we've seen a lot of urban sprawl occurring. And also from an HR standpoint, employees want a clean, stress-free work environment to go home in. If you've ever been out on the facility and you've gotten bit up by stable flies or a horse fly even, I mean, they're painful. So that's a stress on the workers. In some swine facilities, it's enclosed. You have a warm facility year round. You do see a lot more fly issues there. Sometimes those employees don't want to be walking through the barns and just get a mouthful of flies, and they don't want to go home with potential cockroaches in their clothing or in their boots. So it's become an HR issue as well in a lot of operations. And on the dairy side, obviously we have milk inspections and things like that, and needs to be clean and sanitary and not all these little fly specks all over the place too. So a lot of different things that, these little critters can have an impact on. And I think one of the first steps that we have to take is we have to first figure out what the insect is we're dealing with. In livestock, world, there are a lot of things we can't control. There are a lot of uncertainties, but unknown pests shouldn't be one of them. There's a lot of really good resources online. We're going to go over some here today with some photos, but really you need to know what you're dealing with first in order to develop a protocol. So there are different products, different strategies on the market that, depending on the insect, might work better for one versus another. So it's really important to first know that. We have some insect ID cards. A lot of the extension agents have them on hand, where it kind of runs you through the different insects as well as online. I think with AI technology, there's some cool things coming to maybe help you identify pests like you would like a plant. So that's kind of a little futuristic, but the thought's there. Couple things we can identify these different pests with. Obviously, visually, if we can get a good enough look at them, get a good enough picture, we can typically identify them that way. But also behavior. So, are they pasture versus premise insects? So, you'll have different pests that will specifically live on pastured animals versus ones that will prefer more of a confinement animal situation. Some are very species specific, and behavior too is typically when you go out on a farm and you can ask some questions and identify maybe what insect is causing the issue just based on the behavior of the animals alone. And then obviously symptoms and signs. So, are we seeing a lot of welts? Are we seeing a lot of fly specks over the facility? Things like that. So we're not going to go too deep into the weeds here on the super hardcore bug stuff, but we're going to do a brief overview of the different insects that are most common on livestock facilities. So we're going to first start with flies. So you see here, we kind of have them grouped into two separate categories. So we'll have your confined animal pests here on the left, then you'll have your more pasture pests on the right. So on the left, we have our housefly and our stable fly. Those are going to be ones that are found more in confinement animal operations. So dairies, feedlot situations, show barns, poultry houses will have a lot of house flies, swine facilities, same thing there. They thrive in the organic matter that is there around a facility like that. So house flies specifically are more of a nuisance fly, concerns with disease transmission, overall sanitation. They will breed in manure. All four of these flies will breed in manure, but houseflies and stable flies are very good at finding other places as well. So if you're feeding hay, you've got old hay rotting, you've got piles of feed sitting around the facility, you've got overgrown grasses around a manure pit, they will find wherever is on that operation and turn that into a development site. Your stable fly you see here has this biting mouth part as well as the horn fly. So the stable fly and the horn fly are going to be your two blood feeding flies. Stable flies cause a pretty painful bite. They're pretty much going to be found on like the legs of the animals, bellies sometimes. So if you have animals that are stomping, or tail swishing, or they constantly kind of seem to be dancing, it's typically a stable fly issue. Versus a horn fly issue when we jump over to the pasture side of things. Horn flies are the number one most economically devastating insect to the beef cattle industry, specifically pastured cattle. These two are typically found on pasture cattle, or pastured operations, excuse me. Face flies are a culprit of pink eye. They transmit pink eye very easily throughout the facility. But this is kind of a good way that we separate them out into where they're found. And then we can dive into each one specifically. So we're going to start with the hornfly. Like I said, this one is the most devastating insect to the beef cattle industry. You can see here about $2.3 billion a year is what these pests cost. And a lot of that cost comes in production losses. It comes in milk losses, weaning weight. Obviously, that impacts weaning weights, yearling weights from there. And also the stress, the cost to treat a serious hornfly infestation. They are very, very devastating. If you're a beef producer, I'm sure you're familiar with this. They're really tiny. So you can see here, compared to the other ones, they are a very small fly. They don't fly very far. So that's kind of one unique thing about these guys is they pretty much live on the backs of those pastured cows at any given time. They leave just to lay their eggs and then they come back. They bite about 30 to 40 times per day. Kind of a blurry picture here, but obviously a concern for stress, disease factor, since they are blood feeding. And they're going to be the little ones that are all over the backs of the cattle. Sometimes in the summer, you'll kind of see them migrate under the belly, and they just bite all day long and they cause all sorts of irritation. If you've ever brought in cows and they kind of come in with them because they live on the animal, you can almost take your hand and wave it over the backs of them. You'll see this black cloud of hornflies come up, and then they'll go right back down to that animal. So a common question I get asked is, well, why would I do something about my hornfly issue if my neighbor doesn't? Well, they have everything they need right there in your herd. The fly has no incentive to go find another herd. So they are very controllable in a specific herd, even if you might have a neighbor a couple miles away or a couple houses down that might not be doing something about their hornfly issue, it can very much help if you are doing something about it on your own farm. Like I said, here they develop in fresh cattle manure. This is kind of the unicorn fly where it will only lay their eggs in fresh cattle manure. It's only a pastured cattle pest. So you're not going to see these guys on in pig barns. You're not going to see them really with sheep and goat, with horses. They like cattle manure and they like it before it crusts over. So about 30 minutes old. You're only going to see them in a pasture setting because they like undisturbed manure. So if we have a dairy or we have a feedlot where that manure is being walked through, you have scrapers, it's constantly breaking that up. So it's mainly going to be a pastured cattle, a pest. Like I said, they're pretty mobile within a herd, but they really live on the backs of those animals their entire lives. And when we talk about horn flies, it's kind of a good opportunity to increase or to introduce the idea of economic threshold. So economic threshold, one exists for all sorts of insects for different species, but horn flies specifically have about a 200 fly per animal threshold. And the economic threshold can be defined as the point at which the cost to treat and the production losses kind of start to level out and it makes sense to treat. So you see on the left here, we have what we consider excellent or good. And the goal here with any insect we're going to talk about is control, right? We're not going for total eradication. It's just not going to be feasible. No matter how much we do, we're never going to be able to totally eradicate it. So we want to go for control and defined control would be defined as, in the hornfly scenario, about 200 hornflies or less. You see on the right, we start to get above that number. We start to say, okay, what can we do and get this down? But basically at that 200 hornfly level, it is definitely worth it to treat because if you don't, you're going to start to really see those production losses. And to put that in some more real life pictures, so here you can see, I mean, these are all horn flies here. This bull calf was just crawling with them. This is obviously something that we want to treat and take care of. We see on the right here, this was a unique situation. This dairy actually had a pasture, it had a gate out the back of the freestall barn where they could go out on pasture. So they were actually bringing some horn flies in with them. Typically, we don't see a lot of horn flies on dairies, but this was kind of a unique setting. But if we had the pictures on the left and the right, we see two very different stories and two very different levels. And here in the middle, I think it's important to remind people, and this isn't just for horn flies, but as a whole, is that look at your herd or your operation as a whole. Typically, you might see one or two animals within that herd that carries more of that fly load, whether it be a sick animal. Bulls sometimes tend to carry more fly load. We think it's relating to like the testosterone levels, but you can see here we have the one in the middle. Obviously, very clear that we need to do something about that. But we look in the front and the back, and the front and the back look great. I mean, the front one especially, that's well under that 200 horn fly per animal threshold. So make sure you're looking at your herd as a whole and not just, honing in on maybe that one animal in the herd that tends to carry more of the insect load. We're going to jump over to your housefly. So we're going back to confinement pest here. This is probably one a lot of people are familiar with. They're a nuisance fly. You'll see them around the house, around garbage cans, around the picnic. You'll see these guys in all sorts of livestock operations. Unfortunately, just the way that we raise livestock, we have created the perfect environment for houseflies and stable flies to thrive. Disease concerns, they just land and they land on anything gross, any open wounds, anything rotting. That is just, they love that. So sanitation concerns, nuisance pests kind of would be what we're really concerned about with these guys. They have about a 2-week life cycle. You can see here on the right, kind of their, just a very brief overview of their life cycle. So your adult fly lays your eggs. They go through 3 larval stages, what we call larval instars. They pupate, and then they come out of that pupa. They hatch out of that as an adult fly, ready to reproduce from day one. So they will lay their eggs in manure, they will lay their eggs in organic matter, old feed, old bedding, compost piles that aren't being managed and turned properly. They require moisture, so they need something that is, not too wet, not too dry, kind of that in between. And then houseflies specifically, we talk about hornflies, they feed on blood, that's their food source. Houseflies feed on organic matter, sugary substances, so they love milk replacer, calf grain, really high sugar feeds, some horse feeds that might have molasses, blocks, tubs, anything like that. They are all over it. Which because of that feeding behavior and their behaviors that we've been able to observe and study, we have, as an industry and specifically within our company's Star portfolio, we have created a a product for every part of their life, and it's been easy to target them a little bit better than some of these other flies because we're able to understand their behavior. So houseflies feed down low, roughly 4 feet and below. They're going to feed on anything sugary. So, like I said, a lot of the milk, a lot of the grain feed that has that high sugar content. And that's why a lot of the bait products, like a scatter bait or a bait spray, are going to be a sugar-based product that they have to ingest in order for the product to work and kill them. They reproduce at a medium height. So roughly that 4 to 7 foot range, that's where they're flying around. We see them a lot because typically that's our eyesight level, but they are going to be active. They're seeking out a mate. So a lot of the smelly traps that have that really strong pheromone, which is actually a reproductive pheromone for the flies, are placed at that level to try to attract them while they're most active there. And then they rest up high. So any of your sticky tape, your fly ribbon that you might hang in the barn, the sticky tape reel that you go out and crank, that all needs to go up high. At that point, they're merely looking for a place to rest. And that's why we can put a lot of these different sticky things there where they land on it and they just get stuck. So houseflies, we have a lot of options on how we can control them based on what we know about their behavior. And I think too, we'll talk a little bit more about products, solutions at the end, but it's important that when you are using products, you're using them at the right spot and how they were intended to be utilized. Sticking with confinement animal, we're going to touch a little bit here on the stable fly. So again, they're about the same size as like a house fly, but they have that biting mouthpiece up top here. They feed on blood and they spend honestly very little time actually on the animal. So they come, they take a blood meal, and then they go and they rest in a cornfield or vegetation or tall grasses. So they're tricky to control because they do spend such little time on the animal. Again, they're going to be common in any sort of confinement animal operation, concerns for disease vectors, nuisance pests, painful bites, both to the employees and to the animals. When we talk about stable flies, a little bit longer of a life cycle. Again, they'll lay eggs in a lot of the same places that houseflies will. Organic matter, old feed. They do feed on blood, and then they spend a lot of time resting in vegetation and grasses. So cool picture here we see on the left, we have a stable fly. You can see that they obviously just took a blood meal. The most identifying factor, though, being this biting mouth part. Compared to on the right, the house fly, you can see they kind of have different body sizes. They angle themselves a little bit differently, but obviously very key difference here. House flies will tend to land on a surface and regurgitate. Digestive enzymes suck it back up. So that's how they ingest their food as opposed to the stable fly where they're actually biting. Face fly, this is going to be our pasture cattle pest. They're little, commonly feeding on the secretions around the eyes, the nose, the mouth of animals. And that is their main food source. They're really tricky because they will lay their eggs all over the place. They'll lay their eggs in manure. They'll lay their eggs in just wet areas around rivers and creeks, things like that. So they're a little tricky to control, but they will develop in undisturbed cattle manure. They're pretty mobile, so they can fly a couple miles, as opposed to the horn fly, which is pretty stationary, all things considered. And a lot of these different flies, it's a good thing to point out, is they overwinter. So any of those flies that are in that pupal stage as it gets cold will remain in that pupal stage over winter, kind of hibernating, and then they'll hatch back in the spring. So it's really important to not give up on a fly control protocol too early in the season, because you're kind of only setting yourself up for failure in the spring as all those pupa hatch up. So ticks, kind of breeze through this one a little bit. I'm not an entomologist, I will preface that, but we do have an entomologist on staff that if anybody has any specific insect questions, we can always get her in the loop. But a bunch of different tick species out there. A couple of the common ones that you'll deal with livestock would be your Asian longhorn tick, Lone Star tick, dog tick. Um, there's two different kind of categories. So we categorize them as like a three host tick versus a one host tick. So three host ticks are typically going to be the concerning ones for disease transmission because they're actually attaching to an animal, feeding, growing, dropping off, attaching to a new animal, and they do that 3 times. So you can get that disease spreading throughout a herd really quickly. Lice, two types of lice that livestock producers deal with. You're going to have your biting lice, which those guys are going to basically like feed on the skin cells on the hide, not actually biting the animals and sucking blood. But then you have the chewing lice, and they are actually feeding on the blood. Lice are unique in that they basically live on the host all the time. They lay their eggs on the host, they hatch, they live on the host, feed on the host. Um, any livestock operation can deal with them. A lot of show animals, cattle, it could be a really big concern from that standpoint. And we see them itch. So we see here, this is probably an animal infected with sucking lice. So one way you can tell the difference is biting lice, since they're not actually feeding on the blood. The animals will rub and itch, but it's more of a dry, kind of flaky appearance, as opposed to a sucking lice or chewing lice that, as the animals rub and they smush those lice, they kind of cause a greasy appearance on the animals. But obviously, too, very unappealing to the eye, when it comes to markets and showing as well. It can be a really serious issue. Lice are one of the few that we actually can fully eradicate. It can take a very kind of intense insecticide protocol to completely eradicate a lice infestation, but it is possible. And then wrapping up our insect ID here with our tabanids, which are deer and horseflies. I'm sure everyone's probably familiar with these guys. They're nasty. So they are both blood feeders, typically in a pasture scenario. A lot of horse owners deal with these, leaving the big welts all over the horses. Stress, obviously very stressful to the animals, and then a disease vector. So this here is a deer fly. Sometimes they get confused with the bottle flies, but they have the green eyes. They're a little bit bigger, but then we have the house or the horse fly, which is very large. So I'm sure if anyone's ever had a bite from one of these guys, it's very painful. They both will lay their eggs on the undersides of leaves or around water. So if you have a pasture with a creek in it, unfortunately, you maybe be a little more prone to these guys. Their biting mouth part is very sharp and creates kind of an open wound as opposed to the flies where it's a piercing mouth part. Obviously, these guys' goal is to get that blood, and they will feed and feed and feed. They're voracious predators in that they will just come back and feed and feed and feed. And it's nothing to them to fly 10, 15 miles. So they're very hard to control. A lot of it just has to do with the environment that you have. All right, we're going to shift over here to integrated pest management. So as the EPA defines it, you can see the definition here, but IPM is kind of a mindset, and it's the idea that insect control is not a single product, but instead it's a program. And as the definition says here, it's a combination of common sense, intentional decision making. A lot of producers are doing a lot of these things already. They just maybe don't realize how what they're doing affects the insect control program as well. One key difference, and I like to bring this up because I think IPM is talked about a lot on the crop side of things, but I don't think that livestock IPM gets talked about enough. And a main difference is the host, right? On the crop side, we have a plant or a grain or something that is not, we don't have to consider the life of that host. Whereas on the livestock side, we have to consider how the pest is going to react and how it behaves. But we also have to factor in the behavior of the host onto that as well. And also with the different products that we apply and how they affect that host. Like I said here, a lot of people are doing things right already, and maybe they just don't realize that that has such a big impact on the fly control or the insect control on the farm. So things like cleaning up spilled feed, cleaning up old bedding, if you're moving hutches, not letting the old hutch bedding sit there for weeks on end, things that you're probably already doing, but they have such a big impact on the insect populations as well. So when we look at IPM, we kind of start with what they call the PI approach. So planning, implementation, and evaluation. And I know it's like negative 12 degrees and snow on the ground, but the early parts of the planning process for the spring start now. So thinking back to what you did last year, maybe what worked, what didn't work, making intentional decisions on, hey, this is what we dealt with last year. This is what we're going to do differently this year. Implementation. It sounds kind of goofy, but actually do what you had planned to do. And then evaluation is look at it at the end of the year or throughout, every month and say, did it actually work? Adjust on the fly, kind of adjust things as you go if something's not working right for you, or if you don't have the capabilities to do one of these protocols, quickly being able to pivot and transition into something else. And we'll talk a little bit about this, but the idea that different protocols can be preventative versus reactionary. And we'll touch on that here in a minute. But this kind of triangle here is what the IPM pyramid is built on. So we start at the bottom. So we're going to control as much as we can culturally. So good sanitation practices, kind of the things that I don't want to say are easier to control, but maybe don't cost a lot of money to control. And then we're working our way up and using those chemical products maybe as a last resort in our protocol. So cultural, like I said, really should be the basis. Having good compost management, feed bunk, bedding management, manure, sanitation, and cleanliness of the facility. Basically, what we can do is we can try to address all these issues and figure out where these flies are breeding and living, get rid of that, make them go to the manure, or make them go to somewhere where we can treat it and we can control them that way. Physical, building maintenance, equipment repairs, making sure fans are running, making sure that water systems are working properly, waters aren't leaking, causing, everything to get wet and become a fly breeding site, keeping good air moving, sealing up containers. If you have feed storage areas that can be totally like enclosed, like trash cans for horse feed or a whole feed room, something that kind of keeps that away from the insects as they're going to be attracted to that. Biological, there are a lot of different neat biological options out there. So whether that's predatory wasps, fly predators, dung beetles exist in the pasture settings. We have a lot of options that are already existing out there in the planet that we can kind of utilize in our advantage. And then we have our chemical options, which are going to be your larvicides, your sprays, your baits, kind of what we think of as a typical insect control option. Talk a little bit about this, but just some examples here, right? So let's not leave things like this sitting around the farm. You dig a couple inches down in there and you'll just see maggots everywhere, pupa everywhere. And it seems like a very minute thing and kind of annoying to have to go and clean this up around the farm, but it can make a really, really big difference when it comes to the amount of flies we're seeing hatching out in the facility. And sometimes it's just making smart decisions. So this was a dairy that I was on, and this is their calf setup, and this is a tractor full of manure spreader sitting right in front of the calves, and it was broken down. So unfortunately, that's just where it landed. But stuff like this, maybe let's not park it right there. Let's maybe move it away or let's empty it before we park it because we dug down into that and just manure, maggots, larvae everywhere. So making just smart decisions about our facility can really help the insect issue. Physical, touch on this a little bit, but flies are lazy. So if you have really good air movement, they're not going to fly against it. They won't land on the animals. It kind of keeps that like tunnel vent barns kind of keep that air moving. Denying insect entry points, a little tougher on some of our larger scale operations, but repairing fans, keeping equipment running properly. If you have sprinkler systems on the dairy side, making sure those are running well, kind of anything we can do from that standpoint. Predatory beetles. So there are some companies out there that you can actually buy fly predators from. So they'll ship you a bag of like pupa, scatter them around the farm, and they will actually go and lay their eggs inside of fly larvae and pupa. So that's kind of a biological pest control strategy. Dung beetles, they can be a little bit challenging to implement. They're not a perfect option for every single facility. It kind of depends on your setup. Um, but a lot of these ones can be used without any sort of negative effects to the animals or the humans. And again, depends what your target insect is if there's an option like this out there. And more your chemical type options. We're going to talk a little bit more about these in depth since that's typically what is most common. But this is an interesting statistic that I read in some of this research was 80 to 90% of all fly individuals in an environment are in larval stages. So we can spray, we can put sticky traps up all day long, and we're chasing our tail because 80 to 90% of the flies, we don't even see them yet. So it's really important that you do implement some of these preventative control measures, larvicides being one of them. So we have feed throughs. So that's what our company does a lot of would be Clarifly larvicide, Alticid IGR. Another company, I don't know if it's Merck or Lenco, makes Larvadex for poultry. And then, so you see on the right here, kind of the concept of how that would work. It's going into the feed or the mineral or somehow getting consumed by the animal, passing through the animal, and that active ingredient ends up in the manure. So when the flies lay their eggs in the manure, the active ingredient stops those eggs from hatching properly. So that's a really, really good preventative measure. And then we have contact larvicides too. So ones that maybe you could apply to a compost pile, you could apply to bedding, something like Exalt, Teco, Neprex. Those are things that we can treat areas that maybe we can't reach with a feed-through larvicide, like a Clarify or an Alticid. Preventatives are truthfully what an IPM program should be built on. So we really need to be doing something about the next generation of insects and then coming in with maybe some of these other options to target specific problem areas on the facility. Reactionary controls, that'd be your baits, your sprays, your topical treatments, your traps. We cannot rely on these for control. Your entire IPM program cannot be sticky traps or pheromone traps. It needs to be a combination of things. These are really good to monitor sometimes. So sometimes you can use traps to kind of identify where you're at, what your populations look like currently, and determine if you need to spray or if you need to put out some bait. Um, Baits here, granular application, I'm sure probably everyone's familiar with them. You're just putting it out across the facility. A lot of different active ingredients to rotate through, which is important to change it up every now and then. They normally are going to consist of an attractant and then an active ingredient. So something that actually attracts the flies to feed on them, as well as the active ingredient to actually kill the insects. Perimeter sprays and foggers. You can see here a couple different options. They make big A1 misters for tractors or four-wheelers. There's a bunch of different options out there. Sometimes they're either a premise application or they're an actual on-animal spray. This slide kind of focuses on the premise applications. So we're spraying some of the sites that we know that a lot of adult flies are living in, provides a really quick knockdown, can help reset and jumpstart a protocol quickly. There's a lot of different active ingredients out there. These would be very different than ones that you would be putting on animals. So there's kind of two classifications of your on-animal sprays versus your premise sprays. On-animal sprays are going to be a lot of like pyrethrins, permethrins. They're very versatile, whether it's on dairy cattle, beef cattle, sheep, goats, pigs. They're going to be in the form of a spray, a mister, a back rubber. Some dewormers have some insecticide qualities as well. And they're typically broken down, you can see here, into 3A, which are more of your pyrethroids, and then your 1B, which are organophosphates. There's not a ton of these on the market anymore. They are restricted a little bit heavier. Example would be like our prolate can only be used on beef cattle or non-lactating dairy or pigs. So kind of different classifications there, but just some things to be considered when you're thinking about what to use, and also following the label. So we know that the label is the law. We have to follow the applications and the uses that are on a product's label. And then traps, we talked about this a little bit, but these are really great monitoring tools. So you can see this picture up here. This was actually a swine trial we did where we fed Clarifly, but we hung these traps every week to kind of monitor the progress. So they can be good for that. They can kind of tell you when an additional um, implementation or additional spray might be necessary. So if you hang them up maybe the first week of the month and within a week they're full, maybe that's a signal for you to spray or do some other intervention. If you hang them up and they don't fill up for a month, maybe that's a sign that things are looking good right now. You have your sticky traps up top, and then you have like your more smelly pheromone reproductive traps there at the bottom. And then before we wrap up here, so a couple steps on when you go to create your IPM program. First, plan ahead, right? So first we got to know what are we dealing with? What's the pest? Identify any limitations. So whether that's financial limitations, whether that's labor, be realistic about you and your specific situation and what is feasible and what you have the ability to implement. Select your control methods and make sure you're thinking ahead. So this step is probably what producers need to start thinking about in the next month or two, is what are we going to do this year and what products are we going to implement? Ask the questions you need to ask, get the products ordered or available. And then two, we kind of just mentioned that, but get the products, any licensing requirements. Some of these products have restricted use pesticide licenses. A lot of them don't, but some of them do. And then any equipment, if you need a sprayer, if you need a granular application tool to help put that bait out or something like that. And then three is actually do what is planned. So implement, right? So do what we thought we're going to do and then monitor it and don't be afraid to adjust it. So if something's not working, if something breaks, if you have labor issues, it's okay to adjust and pivot, and just maybe try something else. And keep good records too. Kind of make a note of what worked well one year versus what maybe didn't work well another year. So this is just, I put this up here as an example. We have a swine team that works with a lot of these large integrators, and they've actually created some set protocols. So this one is a cockroach protocol program. And we have a bunch of these internally that we will help producers with on the dairy side, on the beef side, but just an example of what maybe an IPM protocol might look like for an operation. So you see here they have a maintenance program, they have a protocol for a serious infestation, and then they have the tracking tools over there on the right. So for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of just breeze through these, but I had put a couple examples on here. We talked about the swine one. That was an issue where they were harboring in the farrowing panels. So what the facility did is they actually spray foamed all of these panels and were able to eliminate the cockroaches from getting in there. And then they implemented our cockroach protocol program. So this was the calf we used earlier in the example, but this was one that we got the call, hey, we're feeding out to IGR, but we're still seeing a lot of flies. And what we found was the animals weren't consuming enough of the mineral. The producer wasn't able to get out there and refill the mineral as often, which wasn't a huge deal because we switched them over to a tub. So the tub they could just put on the four-wheeler or tow behind the side-by-side and put the tubs out there. They were able to eat more of it because it's a sweet molasses base. So things like that we can troubleshoot. And that's a lot of what we do here. This was a poultry facility. This was a unique one because it was in an area where urban sprawl was occurring pretty actively, and they had a lot of complaints from neighbors about flies. So you can see here all the flies on the ground. This was just simply a bait protocol, but they were concerned about disease transmission. They were concerned about sanitation, and obviously the neighbor aspect of it too. And then this was a dairy cows are kicking off milkers, the milkers were getting bit. The inspector actually even made a comment that they needed to implement some sort of a control protocol by the next time he came around. So what we had found, and you can see here, um, just a little snippet of the maggot load in here, but what was happening is they would back their TMR wagon up into here. They had an overhead loader and a lot of it blew off. A lot of it was making this mess, which was getting wet and just creating the perfect environment. And you can't really see it, but the parlor was right back in here. So these stable flies were hatching right out of here and going right to the parlor. So this was I don't want to say an easy fix, but we got all these weeds trimmed down. We got this area cleaned up a little bit. We actually applied a topical larvicide to this area to stop the maggots from hatching out, as well as did some trapping and stuff like that. But a lot of it is facilities, a lot of it is just good management practices, will help an overall insect control program. So I know that was a lot of information. I tried to make sure we got through it in time, but this is my email address. I cover all of Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania. So if there's ever any questions or anybody wants to talk about any products or options available, um, I would be happy to help.
Kenley, thank you. Fantastic presentation. And again, thank you for providing your contact information. Please, people, please feel free to reach out to Kenley anytime. Actually, I do have a couple questions. Let me, okay. One question that came in is about the best products to use to control mites in swine. They say they're using Prolate and it seems to work okay, but they really don't like using it. Any other suggestions?
Yeah, so Prolate's a good one for that. Prolate is a strong product. It smells, it has a really strong odor. So I understand that one. One good one that you can swap it out for would probably be like a pyrethrin. Something like we have a couple. Crop spray has a very versatile label, could be used on animal. I'd have to double check that it has mites on the label, but um, that'd be one I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know if this is a show facility or a smaller barn, but sometimes the bedding too can bring in, depending on where you're getting your bedding from, if it's kiln dried, sometimes the mites are actually coming in on your bedding. So maybe making sure that that's not happening could be a good one. But maybe some of the pyrethrin based products would be something to try if if you don't like the prolate.
Okay, fantastic. One other question, little different. Somebody would like to hear more about the New World screwworm. Do you have any insight into that?
I wish our entomologist was on. She knows a lot more about that than I do. Basically, what I've been told from her is us up here in the north, we really don't need to be concerned about that right now. It's I mean, right now it's down in Mexico. I don't think there's been any cases coming over into the US yet, but New World screwworm does not do well in cold temperatures. They typically can't really survive that long. I know the USDA is doing the sterile fly facility, so they're going to release, hundreds of sterile flies. That's how we eradicated this back in the 70s and 80s. So they're trying to get that implemented now. I do have I wonder if I can pull it up quick. We have something our entomologist put out about New World screwworm that I think would be a good resource, maybe that I can share. Um, I don't know how the best way to get that out to people would be.
Let's good question. Here, can you share your screen real quick? We'll see if we can do it. We have about another minute or two. We can try
Yeah,
it.
let me see if I can find it really quick.
Okay. And no worries if we can't. We can find a way to get that information or that anybody can contact you directly too if they want that.
I think we're pulling it up here.
Okay.
It is a hot topic right now, though.
Yes, yes, it is. I have actually one more question,
Mhm.
if you can multitask.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just taking forever to load.
All right. Does IGR impact beneficial insects such as dung beetles?
They do not. Nope. So IGR would be referring to like the methoprene, so our Alticid product. It does not. It does not have an impact on the dung beetles.
Wonderful.
Now
Wonderful.
you do have to be careful when maybe this will open when you're using like fly predators or wasps, things like that, that you're not spraying where you're putting them out and killing them. But in terms of the dung beetle, no, they do not have, Alticid does not impact the dung beetle. So they
All
can
right.
be kind of used in conjunction to that.
Fantastic.
Okay, maybe it might finally load here. Sorry about that. Fact sheet, here we go. Okay, so this is not the one I was thinking, but this is a good one. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So this is one that I think was put out by the Texas Animal Health Commission, but there's a lot of really good resources out there. There are, I'm sure people have seen some new products that have been kind of emergency use labeled for screwworm. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, but right now, my understanding is they have some pretty strict protocols in place on cattle coming in from Mexico, and cattle moving around down there in that South Texas area, that they are catching a lot of the cases early. They're able to inspect the animals. They're catching the New World screwworm cases, quarantining animals and not letting those animals move. So I think a lot of it is going to come down to people following the regulations that they're setting around moving animals. I don't think they're seeing a lot of it moving on one big concern our entomologist had was wild game and wild animals transmitting screwworm, whether it's wild hogs, feral hogs, things like that. They are not seeing a lot of that right now. Um, I think it's definitely something just to keep an eye on and keep an ear to the ground on, um, but I don't know that I have anything groundbreaking to share on that. There's a lot of really good resources. Texas A&M, I think, has been one that's put out a lot of stuff on the screwworm. And if you shoot me an email, whoever asked this question, I can loop in our entomologist that might be able to answer this better than I could.
No, fantastic. All right. Kenley, thank you. That was fantastic, very informative. And I, again, love the cockroach video. Always, always entertaining to watch that one. Okay, so if you have any more questions for our speaker, please feel free to reach out to Kenley or anybody on the water quality team, and we will make sure that we get those questions over to Kenley for sure. Kind of to wrap things up, thank you again, everybody. Kenley, thank you. And, again, mark your calendars for February 25th, which is our next Water Quality Wednesday webinar, and then also April 6th, which would be our next CLM webinar. And registration sites are listed. And again, any questions, reach out to us, either email or our website. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, everyone.